Hey, it's Dr. Henkel here. Welcome to week 14, and we're going to go over Creswell's chapter 15 titled Narrative Research Designs. So, if you would go ahead and open up the chapter 15 PowerPoint that I have right here, and then we'll go and start from the beginning. So here we are, Chapter 15, Narrative Research Design. So hopefully y'all have already read the chapter, and so now we can just kind of review it and see what Creswell has for us to learn about this qualitative type study. So this is another qualitative type study. It's pretty new, as you would have learned from reading the chapter. Here's the objectives posted on the first slide. And so with narrative research, its growing popularity and interest, it kind of started around the 80s, and now it's starting to generate some popularity, and you'll start seeing a little bit more of it. It describes the lives of individuals, personal events, and what they go through, and then the researcher records that information, and then they will write a research report based on those findings. So it focuses on one single person. So unlike all of the other quantitative studies that focuses on, hundreds to thousands of people, this is just one person, kind of like an interview style. And you'll gather data through a collection of their stories and report individual experiences from those stories. And then you can discuss the meaning of those experiences for the individual. Okay, so now we're on to slide 4. Telling stories is a natural part of life. It's something that we do as even young children, and as we continue to grow, we are accustomed to that. And so when individuals are willing to tell their stories is when you need to make sure that the participants want to tell their stories, and then they also want their stories to be heard. You can also do this type of research when you, as the reporter, want to report personal experiences in a particular type of setting, or you want to have a close bond with the participants, because naturally that's going to happen as you're sitting there one-on-one with them, chronologically recording their stories or their testimonies. So it's kind of a neat way to be able to put your faith into your research, because you can go and hear others' testimonies when they're willing to share them with you. So I really like that aspect behind this type of research. You want to also report it in order, and you can also end with some type of a persuasive literary form as your final product. It is a literary form of qualitative research, and it has strong ties to literature, where you can write, your persuasive literary report afterwards. So here it says, when did it develop, or how did it develop? Clarendon and Connolly were the first ones to really report about this type of research. It's based on the principles of having a past, present, and future experiences and interactions. So you're really looking at these participants' experiences. And it says that it was used at least in the 80s, but in the 90s is when they first started reporting on it. And you can find more information about that on page 514 in your text. Okay, so what are the types of narrative design? Okay, and figure 15.1 shows you the types of narrative design. And so that's on page 515. And so it gives you a list. There's autobiographies, biographies, life writing, personal narratives. And so there's a ton of different types of designs that you could do. And so there's 5 questions, and they're discussed, and they're helpful in determining the type of narrative research that you want to do. So who writes or records the story? Is it going to be a biography or an autobiography? So you could do this on yourself, and that would be the autobiography. How much of a life is recorded or presented? So you need to think about how much history or experiences you would be able to document, because you're going to need quite a bit. It needs to be extensive. Who's providing the story? A lot of times you could do this with teachers and interview teachers and get their stories on what they're facing in the classroom. And is there a theoretical lens being used? So a lot of times that will come out also in your study. And lastly, when can narrative forms be combined? You'll see throughout this, it will discuss in your book that these 5 characteristics of a design can be interconnected, and you'll kind of do all of them really, because you could be doing a biography with a theoretical lens, with getting teacher stories. So we're kind of going to break this down a little bit and discuss each individually in the next few slides. So first, who writes or records the story? So you're going to determine who will write and record the individual's story. So biography, that's whenever the narrative studies, the researcher writes and records the experiences of another person's life. We know this. And then autobiography, on the other hand, is the individual who is the subject of the study writes the account. Okay. Second, how much of a life is recorded and presented? So this is like what anthropologists do. They study human societies, and if you look at the first part, it says life history. This is a narrative story, so the research would be focusing on the entire life experiences of that person. So they're focusing on turning points or significant events of that life story. And on the other side, you could maybe do a personal experience story, which is the opposite. That's where you're looking at the individual's personal experience found in a single or multiple episodes. So it's going to be smaller, tailored down, so private situations, okay? Maybe individual or social. So I like to think of the life history research would be like your watermelon idea. So it's big, it's the whole thing. Or if you wanted to focus more on one or two, personal experiences, that would be like your seed idea. That's how I used to teach writing, is doing those watermelons or seed ideas. And so it's kind of the same concept here when you're thinking about doing narrative research. Okay, third, who provides the story? Okay, so you need to think about that. This is just part of the design of your study. You need to think about who's going to provide the story. Different individuals in the setting can provide the story. You could do teachers, educators, nurses, counselors. I mean, the sky's the limit. You decide. And you just need to be able to write it down and be able to focus on that. And so, or you could even do studies that focus on the children's story, okay? Like, what are their experiences? It can go either way. So that's just another part of the narrative design approach. That's the third component. The fourth component is there a theoretical lens being used? Okay, so that just means that there's some type of guiding perspective. So it's guiding you on maybe what your outcome is going to be. So it guides your perspective or ideology that provides structure for advocating for groups or individuals in the written report. So, like I said earlier, on how this can integrate into your faith with doing research that's based on maybe some guiding principles in the Bible. You can focus on different individuals' testimonies. Maybe you want to focus on, if you focus on a story about a women's experience, then that would be through a feminist lens, okay? If you provide a voice for those seldom heard, so that might be a lens that you're advocating for somebody that doesn't get to necessarily have an input on what's being done to them, okay? So those would all be different examples of a theoretical lens that you're going to be focusing and looking through as you conduct this study, this research. Okay, so next, the fifth one is this is, can narrative forms be combined? So this is kind of what I said earlier, that they can overlap. You're going to be doing more than one of these different designs. So, possible, yes, you can have different elements. For example, a biographical and a personal study of an educator. So, you are doing a biography, and it is looking through getting experience from an educator for their experiences. Okay, so that would be two. So the next one says also it could address a life event of someone who decides to leave their profession. So that could be a, let's get back to it. So who provides the story would be from the educator, and then their life event would be like a life history type of narrative design. So that goes back to that. And then finally, might also include a feminist narrative. So maybe you're looking through that um, lens of through the women. Okay, so this can overlap. You're not just stuck to just choosing one, which is nice. Biography, so it's like a personal story, and then the teacher story, that's how they provide the story, and then the feminist perspective is your theoretical lens. So yes, okay, so it contains all four of those different elements there. So what are the key characteristics of a narrative design? So table 15.2 briefly gets that out to you on page 518, and then we're going to go through each of these as well. So it compares, and this table is on page 517, so let me get to that. So we're going to compare the research process, which y'all are familiar with now, qualitative characteristics, and then compare it to the narrative research characteristics, which is what we're learning about today. So the research process, let's talk about when we identify a research problem. For qualitative studies, the problem requires exploration and understanding. And with narrative research, you're going to seek to understand and represent experiences through the stories individuals live and tell. Okay, so you're still needing to do that understanding, you're just doing it through their stories. Okay, and then whenever you did your literature review, the qualitative study plays a minor role. Okay, the qualitative literature justifies the research problem. For narrative research, it seeks to minimize the use of literature and focuses on the experiences of the individuals. So they're taking a step back from that literature component being a driving force. Okay, so well, in quantitative studies, it would be a driving force. Qualitative, it takes a minor role, and then even less so whenever you're doing the narrative research characteristics. Now, it's still important. You're still going to need to know, like, how has this been studied before? Is there a reason for this study? And that's what you would do through and discover through your literature review. Okay, so the next research process is when you develop your purpose statement and your research questions. Okay, so if you remember in qualitative research questions and the problem are broad and general, okay, because then you're going to kind of get narrowed down as you conduct your research. Now, quantitative, it's different. They're very specific, okay? Qualitative purpose research statement and questions seek participants' experiences. And so, similar with the narrative research characteristics, you're going to be looking for the meaning of those experiences of the individual told through stories, okay? Now, let's talk about qualitative data. Whenever you're doing that for your qualitative research, it's based on using different protocols, and you see that in your article that you have to do an assignment with this week. You'll see that protocol is in Appendix A for that assignment. Okay, and so qualitative data collection involves gathering text or image data. And so here in narrative research, you're going to gather data, and it's going to be the individual story in his or her own words, okay? So next, the research process is to analyze and interpret that data. So now you have your data. Qualitative data analysis consists of text analysis, okay? It consists of describing information and developing themes. And you're going to see with narrative research, you're still doing that same thing. You're going to be doing coding, and you're going to find different codes to be able to summarize your data. So You analyze the stories by retelling the individual stories. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to retell the story, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to find themes that are within that retelling, okay? So you've done the interview, you do the retelling, now you're going to find your themes. Next, you're going to put the story with its place or setting, and you're going to seek to analyze the story in chronological order, okay? So about the individual's past, present, and future. That's critical. Okay, so then once you've done that, you're going to be able to write your evaluation. With qualitative research, the reports are flexible and the structure emerges as you evaluate. And you can take a reflexive and biased type of approach with it. With narrative research, you're going to collaborate with the participant when writing the research studies. You're actually going to work with your participant. You're going to write the study in a flexible storytelling mode, and you want to evaluate the study based on depth, accuracy, persuasiveness, and realism of the account. So it's a little different. Okay, so let me flip forward in my notes. Okay, so individual experiences. What are the key characteristics of narrative design? Okay, so experiences are both personal and social. Okay, um, then we have the chronology of the experiences. Pardon me. Okay, so you're going to write using a time sequence. So kind of like what we just mentioned, everything's going to be in time order of their life events. And then you're going to collect individual stories. A story is a first-person oral retelling of an individual's experience. They have a beginning, middle, and end. There's perhaps, conflict, a struggle that had to, they had to go through. And there's a protagonist or character that's going to be discussed. So kind of just your basic writing concepts whenever you learn to write research reports in high school. Okay, so like novels, they have a time, place, plot, and scene. And when you have field text, those are all collected from different sources. So you can collect information from different sources. Okay, so restoring. Okay, so that's a term is discussing the individual stories. So you're going to gather stories and analyze them for elements of the story. You rewrite the story to place it in that chronological order, and it needs to have a casual link among the ideas present. So you're going to link it together whenever you're retelling it or restoring the story. And you would include the interactions, continuity, and the situations. Okay, so you're going to kind of just paint a picture of what happened in a way that we could understand it as if we were there. Okay, now you have transcriptions. That's when you conduct the interview and you transcribe the recording. It's word for word. When you do a retranscription, you are transcribing the key elements. So this is the process that you're going to go through. Just think of it like as an upside down triangle. You're starting broad, and then you're going to go through this process and get your ideas smaller and smaller as you do them. So transcribing it, you are going to actually write word for word everything that they're telling you. You would probably, record it with your phone or recording device of some kind, go back, and then you can hear it, and then you would just transcribe it. Now, after you've done that, you're going to do the retranscription, and that's when you just retranscribe it with key elements. So it's not complete sentences, it's just kind of like the key elements or the main ideas from that transcription. And then the last phase is your restoring. And that's when you can just put it like on a bullet list, like these different codes that you could pull from their transcription about what necessarily they were talking about and going through. Okay. Now, there's different ways that you can organize all of this information, and I'm going to go through two ways with you. So, there's 5 elements used in restoring in this first example. You would have your setting. You need to describe your setting. That's where it was, where did it take place, what time, what year is it, what era, what were the conditions, all of those type of items. So you need to make sure that you're asking those type of questions also. The second part would be your characters. Who's involved in the story? What type of personalities do they have? What were their behaviors? Why did they behave that way? What patterns did they present with? Next would be actions. So, how did they move throughout the story, illustrating the character's thinking or behavior? What actions took place throughout that process? Problems, questions to be answered. Okay. And then after you've identified those, what resolutions were made to answer the problem? So, how did it resolve itself? Now, this is how a researcher restores key codes into a sequence, and you can see this on page 521 on table 15.3 if you are interested in doing it that way. Another way that you could do it is just another example. It's called the three-dimensional space narrative structure. So your 3 dimensions are here at the top. You have your interaction, continuity, and situation. Okay, so for your interaction, this is all metaphorical, and it creates a metaphorical inquiry space that defines a narrative study. So you're going to look inward to internal conditions, feelings, hopes, okay, for that person. And then social, that's when you look outward on these conditions with their environment and what were their intentions and purposes. So that's your first dimension. Here's your second dimension when you're looking at past, present, and future ideas. So you look back in the stories that were told that they remembered from earlier times. And then, present and future is self-explanatory. And then finally, your third dimension, as you're organizing your data from after you've gone through and collected the stories from your participant, you're going to look at the context and time and place of the situation in a physical landscape and figure out what their characters' intentions were, what were their purposes, what different viewpoints emerged, and then all of this combined will create your organized data on what you transcribed and what you got whenever you gathered their stories, okay? And so it's just a metaphorical narrative study. It's a little more in depth doing it this way, but I think you could get a lot more rich data out of it, it seems like. And so if we go to the next slide. Okay, so you're familiar with coding, and with qualitative studies, all of them, the data can be segmented into themes. So coding for themes. So as you discover your themes after you've coded it, you're going to provide the complexity of the story. You're able to add depth to the insight about the understanding of an individual's experiences. And then you can incorporate the retelling of these experiences in a separate section of your study. So you're going to be able to write these type of themes that emerged. Now, another key characteristic of narrative design is identifying the context or your setting. This is the place where the story physically occurs. Okay, so that's pretty easy to understand. Next, another key characteristic of narrative design is when you collaborate with your participants. So that's something that we haven't really seen before in research, is being able to work with the participants so closely. And so that's going to happen. You're going to get more involved with them as it unfolds. And so here's just different strategies that it talks about. So like when you're negotiating relationships, you're going to lessen the potential gap between the narrative told and the narrative reported when you're doing that. And when you're explaining the purpose of the inquiry to the participants, that's going to help them understand why are you asking me these questions? Why are we here? They're going to know exactly why and what you're doing. And so you're going to be able to negotiate transitions in the research process with your participants, and you can arrange ways to intermingle and work with them. So it's a symbiotic relationship. You're working together, and you're going to build a good relationship with them. And it's a very personal type of research design. Okay, so we'll go. Now it says, what are some potential ethical issues in gathering stories? So as always, we have to think, ethically, what do we need to make sure we're doing to do it correctly without breaking any rules or getting faulty data, because you don't want to do that either. You want your research to be top notch. And so you need to think, is this story authentic? Are they faking the data? Is that possible? Is the story real? Okay. Are they able to tell the real story? Who owns the story? Do they have permission to be talking about what they're sharing with you? So these are just some of the questions that you need to pose as you're designing and developing your research. Okay. And that's what every good researcher does. Okay, so now we have the different steps when conducting your narrative research. And so this is just a good overview of all the different steps. And it starts here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is this middle one, and then 5, 6, 7. And so we're going to go over each of those, so I won't spend too much time on this slide. So step 1, you're going to identify the phenomenon to explore that addresses an educational problem. So just like with any research, you have to figure out what is the problem, what can be researched, and identify that, okay? And so you identify that issue or concern. Is there a central phenomenon? And so, for example, it could be stories about teachers having difficulty meeting diverse needs of students. So that could be an example of an issue that people have, okay? So, and that is an issue. Think about all the different needs that different diverse students have, and then teachers trying to fulfill those needs in the classroom. So that would be a necessary research topic to address. Second step, you're going to select individuals from whom you can learn about the phenomenon. Because kind of like with those ethical questions, like, can this person tell this story? Are they telling me the right story? Are they telling me the truth? So you want to be able to pick an individual who you can get a true, accurate story from, so that you can do your research to the best of your ability. And figure out who that is. That's the second step. Step 3, you're going to collect the story from that individual. Okay, so, and it kind of goes more into how you can do that. You're going to record it like in a journal or a diary, have the individual do that. You can observe the individual and record field notes, or you could collect letters sent by the individual. So earlier when it said you can get different types of data, this is what it means. So like how you're going to collect it, it can be obtained through any of these. Okay, it's not just a sit down, let's have a conversation. Okay, so there's a lot of neat ways that you can go about this. And so you choose what's best for you with your research. And so it gives you that freedom to be able to do so. Step 4, restory or retell the individual story. So that's when you're going to go and you're going to transcribe that data, okay? A lot of times individuals, when they're telling their story, they're not going to tell you it in order, because things will come to them as they're telling it, and they might have to go back. And so as you're transcribing it, you're going to put it in chronological order. And so that's when you're going to start seeing, identifying the different elements within the story. And you'll also present like the time, the place, the plot, and the scene. The 5th step, collaborate with the participant and the storyteller. So this, you're going to interact as in you do with all the other steps. And you're going to work with the participant during the process. And we've been over that. So step 6, you're going to write the story. So here you're going to be able to highlight the themes that are happening and incorporate literature into the final sections of the research. And the 7th step, validate the accuracy of the report. So that's an important step. You're going to collaborate with the participants to validate it. You're also going to do member checking or triangulating the data sources. And you're going to search for disconfirming evidence. So this is a very crucial step to be able to make sure that the information you're getting is accurate. And so your book goes into really good detail on how to go about doing that. Okay, and so then we have our last slide, and it says, how do you evaluate the research? Okay, so you've done it. How are you going to evaluate it? So at the end, you're going to need to be able to do this. As qualitative research, narrative needs to be consistent with the criteria for a good qualitative study. So you want to focus on the single individual, and you're going to report those experiences, and you're going to take those stories and restories and possibly develop a chronology of events, and you're going to describe the context of the story, setting, and people involved. Report the themes that arise out of the story, and then collaborate with your participants to do so, and then triangulate it and make sure that all of your data is accurate. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I enjoyed preparing for this lesson and learning what Creswell has to say about narrative research designs. And just let me know, what do y'all think about this? Is this something that you think that you'd be interested in doing? Is it not? Just shoot me an email and let me know what you think. And I'd like to discuss that with y'all. Hope y'all have a great week. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.